kids suddenly were drawn towards Smells Like Teen Spirit because Kurt Cobain was singing their life to them.
Smells Like Teen Spirit was not just a hit, it was an anthem.
It's going to stand the test of time as a song that defined a moment and defined a generation.
I sat there in the dark and just listened to it and thought that, wow, this is going to change everything.
I've just noticed that people expect more of a thematic angle with our music. You know, they always want to read into it. And before I was just using pieces of poetry and just garbage, you know, just stuff that just would spew out of me at the time. And a lot of times when I write lyrics, it's just at the last second because I'm really lazy. So, and then I find myself having to come up with explanations for it.
Usually songs that are the most powerful politically don't mention an obvious politic.
Smells Like Teen Spirit do Nirvana foi o hino de uma revolução não tão silenciosa que mudou a história da música, agitou uma indústria controlada por poucas multinacionais e ainda ajudou a mudar a cara da política americana. Em 1991, com o lançamento de Smells Like Teen Spirit, do marcante álbum Nevermind, o Nirvana e seu líder, o falecido Kurt Cobain, se transformaram na voz e obsessão de uma juventude que a mídia chamava de preguiçosa, fracassada ou simplesmente geração X.
The idea of Generation X, it could be, this is the idea in the chorus, here we are now, entertain us. Like, okay, that's a kind of unusual request. What's this about?
I feel stupid and contagious. It wasn't a defensive generation about the government, the country. It was a questioning generation.
Even though, you know, a lot of the 90s was this kind of boom era, and, you know, the people were making money and the economy was great and so on and so forth, I think that there's a, you know, all throughout that time, I think people still felt like they weren't sure what they were doing with their lives, and there's this sort of underlying search for meaning.
Here you have a generation of kids, you know, who are really wanting a family structure and not having it. They're left to their own devices and highly disillusioned on what's happening around them as well.
I've always felt like Smells Like Teen Spirit was the song in which America learned how incredibly unhappy its children were, how really dissatisfied its children were. I go back, and the where we are politically now reminds me of this very much. I go back to the Gulf War, which happened, 2 years before Teen Spirit broke. There was a peace demonstration in Seattle. And those same 2,000 people who I saw at clubs were widely represented in that demonstration. This is at a time when George Bush, the senior, had 90% approval ratings. There's nothing more disenfranchising as a citizen of a democracy than realizing that what you believe, what you hold dear and deeply to your heart, is viewed as being morally reprehensible by the other 90% of the population.
You see a very conservative government, and that conservative government is one that doesn't allow any major protest to occur in the way that it occurred with the hippie culture or the punks of the early 70s.
That song and the dissatisfaction it gave voice to have a lot to do with electing Bill Clinton, because from that follows Rock the Vote.
You now see politicians speaking to a generation of youth more, you know, coming to them, coming on their level of sitting down at their table, going on MTV, going on Arsenio Hall as President Clinton did, to really get a large portion of the youth vote out there, which, you know, may or may not have, you know, led to his presidency indirectly.
It was 1991. And you look at what was big then. It was a lot of safe stuff. There was Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston, Michael Bolton, Taylor Dane, Amy Grant. This was the year Garth Brooks started, and the soft Nashville stuff starts coming, and this is something that really needed to happen.
It's not an accident that Garth Brooks and Nirvana broke about the same time. Garth Brooks took the old rock fans, the soft rock fans, the Jackson Browne fans, the Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young fans. He took them away to country radio for a while. Rock and roll has to periodically reinvent itself, get younger.
At the time, you know, the music that was out there that was in the, you know, in the top of the charts, the rock and roll at least, was this horrible big hair metal by like Poison and these guys wearing more makeup than your mom, you know. And so for Nirvana to break through when they did, it just kind of was, personally for me, it was like, God, one of us made it through. Like, you could do this. You could get up there in your jeans and your t-shirt and not brush your hair and just like scream and rail, and it can be as cathartic as you want, and it can work. You don't have to have it funneled through the ideas of 1,600 music industry people and handlers and a big glossy video. It can just be this cool, scrappy thing that came from a garage.
The image was just fascinating, their looks and what they represented. Also the fact that this is now a city sound. There's a Seattle scene, and Nirvana begins the Seattle thing.
Seattle, no noroeste dos Estados Unidos, não era a candidata mais óbvia a centro da música mundial. De lá vieram a cadeia Starbucks, Jimi Hendrix, Gisp Rose Lee, o avião a jato e Smiley. Mas no final do século XX não havia nenhum sinal de que a cidade revolucionaria o mundo do rock.
The live music scene in Seattle really sucked in the 80s. It mostly was cover bands. There weren't a lot of clubs. And in some ways, that actually helped, I think, the Seattle music scene, because bands decided to, well, there's not much else we can do. Let's make our own record.
There were 1 or 2 places to play original live music in Seattle. And there'd been 10 or 15 years of great bands, or what we thought were great bands in Seattle, who tried and who never got out. The only act from that area, there were 2 acts from the Seattle area who'd made money before the whole grunge thing happened. Kenny G and Hart. Those were not exactly templates that one wished to follow if one were a punk musician, say.
There was a geographic isolation that helped a lot too, that most of the bands from here really weren't inspired by other groups. They really followed their own muse, and in some ways I think that made them more original.
When Nirvana hit, you know, record companies, when something's hits and something is hot, rather than saying, hey, that was great, man, let's go look for something else. When something hits, they want to keep that formula going. Hey, if Nirvana is going to sell millions of records, let's go get another Nirvana. So Nirvana's from Seattle, so let's go to Seattle. Well, usually that formula doesn't work, but in this case, there really was a very good music scene going on in Seattle. So when they would go to Seattle, they would find not only Nirvana, but Pearl Jam, but Alice in Chains, you know, Mother Love Bone at the time. There were all these bands, Soundgarden, that were in the Seattle area that were just kick-ass rock bands.
O Nirvana assinou o contrato com um selo independente local chamado Sub Pop.
They were 2 of the smartest marketers and promoters the music industry has seen since Colonel Tom Parker made Elvis a star. Those 2 guys knew how to write ads, to design albums, to create a style.
Nenhum selo cresce sem um artista certo. O Sub Pop foi o primeiro a gravar o Nirvana, cujo sucesso inspirou uma avalanche de gravações, transformando a música alternativa em mainstream.
They became these spokespeople, the kind of the kings of the scene, as it were. And I know that Kurt always wanted to be successful, and I think he worked at his songwriting the way that, you know, any craftsperson works at their craft. You know, I don't think that it was just a spontaneous exercise in expression. I think that he really worked at these things, and he made better and better songs.
He writes these incredibly dark and depressing songs about how life is shit and life is depressing. And yet, he's married and he just brought a child into the world. And I asked him why he did that. And he answered that...
I really was a lot more negative and angry and everything else a few years ago, but that had a lot to do with not having a mate, you know, not having a steady girlfriend and stuff like that. So, you know, that was one of the main things that was bothering me, that I wouldn't admit at the time, you know. So now that I've found that, the world seems a lot better for some reason, you know. It really does change your attitude about things.
Daqui a pouquinho vamos saber mais sobre a gravação do clipe Smell Like a Teen Spirit e o sucesso do grunge.
Impacto.
No final dos anos 80 e início dos anos 90, numa casa em Olímpia, perto de Seattle, Kurt Cobain escreveu a maioria das músicas de Nevermind, álbum revolucionário do Nirvana. Aqui, uma amiga do cantor pichou na parede do quarto dele o slogan: Kurt tem cheiro de espírito adolescente.
There was sort of this little scene happening in Olympia at the time, and Kurt was kind of double dating with Dave Grohl, who was his roommate at the time, and there were a number of women, including Kathleen Hanna and Toby Vale, who eventually were going to form Bikini Kill and go on and do a number of things themselves. Kurt was interested in Toby, and Kathleen was taunting him about that. And Kathleen apparently wrote on the wall of Kurt's apartment, "Kurt smells like Teen Spirit." And it was written kind of as a slam to say, essentially, he smelled like this woman's scent. Kurt didn't understand that at all. That totally went over his head and thought it was a revolutionary anthem kind of line. And consequently, he sat down and wrote the song. The song really isn't about that event, but I think that that's what inspired the piece of graffiti.
O fato é que com Smell Like Teen Spirit a banda atingiu o estrelato e transformou o grunge no estilo do momento.
I don't know who made up the word grunge. I don't think that Nirvana ever said that they were a grunge band.
I just don't get it. I don't know. What is grunge? Didn't it mean just like the mildew on your shower curtain?
No one set out to market this music as that, that's what happens when the media catches on. They have to call it something. I like it as much as new wave. I would have been proud to be a new waver, 15 years ago.
If grunge as a phrase meant anything, what it meant was a kind of fusion of the suburban metal instinct with the urban punk instinct. What Kurt Cobain in particular was gifted at was adding a little bit of pop to that. There was just we all were raised with the Beatles in some context. He figured out a way to make the Beatles work somewhere underneath those other two layers.
The melody is beautiful. That's one of those things. It could be this loud grunge song, and you're supposed to play it with passion. It's real garage rock, honest music. But
Load up on guns, bring your friends. It's fun to lose and to pretend.
That song is their song. And with every measure that I was putting down on tape, I was very clear that that was their baby. But she just hung out with me for a while, like a friend. Seeing that there's another side to that rage, that male rage that was being expressed. Because within all that male rage, there's something ripped up. There's something sliced open. I mean, that's obvious. So I was going after that.
It's a catchy song. It's a great power pop tune. The fact that there's this underlying message of anger and discontentment is almost secondary to the melodic hook.
The Beatles influenced everyone. Part of what made me want to become a musician was the ability to do what they were doing, which was to continue to stick up and say, hey, I think this is bullshit. I don't agree with this, and I'm gonna sing about it really loud. And that's I still carry that with me today. Just that ability to not have to fall into the rat race and not have to swim with the rest of the fish.
The whole thing that it said to me, and the whole thing Nirvana said to me, and their breakthrough said to me, and the way that the music sounded, was that you can hold on to your punk rock ideals, yet survive and thrive in the mainstream. And I know it sounds kind of silly now, but at the time that was a really big deal.
It was this, huge shift in music. And it kind of became, for a very brief moment, the soundtrack to Seattle. I mean, you'd walk down the street and it'd be coming out of one car, and you'd be walking by, a corner coffee shop, and they'd be playing Nevermind, and you'd walk to your friend's apartment and he'd be playing it. I mean, it was wacky how the song became the sound of Seattle for a brief moment. video to Smells Like Teen Spirit was really a landmark video in a number of ways. I think it captured the emotion of the song. You know, the behind-the-scenes stories, which I talk about in my book, is that Kurt was fighting quite a bit with the director of that video, and Kurt basically wanted to direct the video. You know, many of the ideas were his.
When it comes to collaborating with Kurt, I'm not so sure I would call it a collaboration. I would say that it was a punk band that wanted to do a punk video, and I was trying to make my own personal Apocalypse Now, and somewhere in between there was a collaboration.
The wild story about that video, which most people don't know, is that, you know, at the very end of the video you have this janitor who's kind of pushing the mop, and, you know, you don't really have a context for what that's about. But what I found out researching Kurt's life is that he actually had dropped out of high school, and the only job he could get was as a janitor at the high school that he was supposed to be attending. I can only imagine the shame that he must have felt donning a brown jumpsuit and mopping the halls up where the kids are walking past him that, you know, are going to graduate and go on to college, some of them, and here he is, a dropout. I just can't imagine that. So then the irony of him, you know, only a few years later, you know, becoming a rock star and making a music video and putting a janitor in that video, that's an amazing story.
MTV didn't even want to play Nirvana when they first released their video.
This was the age of Guns N' Roses and Poison and Whitesnake, and alternative music did not get played on MTV, and this was when MTV was a channel that played music 24 hours a day, and I felt like I had something that was really exciting. I can still remember the feeling I had when the shoot was done, because the shoot was intense, and there was a lot of emotion on the shoot. Kurt was actually very angry with me, and Kurt did not want to perform the song. And when Kurt gave his performance, it was like 11 o'clock at night, and you know, I didn't think we would even get the performance. So once I got that intense performance in the can, and the last image in the video is all the kids rioting, that stuff was unscripted. Those kids really did that for real. So when I finished the video, after a very long and very intense day, and I had all that film in the can, even though I wasn't sure what MTV may or may not do with that video, I knew that I had something that was pretty special.
The music of a certain time was fading out. The big hair, crazy, clown-like rock and roll bands of that time were fading out. Period. They were fading out. At the same time that they were fading out, Nirvana was getting huge. So rather than admit that their fan base is waning, it's much easier for them to say, well, our fan base stayed the same, but Nirvana killed the rock and roll scene.
Heavy metal got put in its place. It was kind of, you know, the big hair thing was getting a little out of hand. The men had big hair, some women had big hair. The 80s were just getting kind of silly, and I think people were kind of floundering as to where we're going to go with style, musical style and look style. And they come along with the grunge thing and whatever, whether plaid's back or T-shirts, jeans, whatever it is. It's simpler. It's more authentic. Less of the spandex and big hair and all that.
A chamada moda grunge, com seus jeans rasgados, camisas de flanela e tênis gastos, fez sucesso no mundo todo. Bandas como Screaming Trees, contemporânea do Nirvana no cenário musical de Seattle, logo descobriu como o estilo se espalhou rapidamente pelo país.
They were in New York, and all of a sudden they realized that what they were wearing, that they'd been made fun of for their entire career, was now being sold as high fashion. And the guy, I remember Van Connor telling me on the phone, it's like, I don't even know what to wear now. I've never had to think about what I wore in my life. And now all of a sudden I look like this grunge trendy guy. It's like, who am I supposed to be now?
Definitely brought the dress code way down. You know, you didn't have to be flashy or wear studs or leather or anything. You just pulled an old shirt out of the closet, flannel, you know, and ripped up jeans, and you were cool.
Fashion-wise, it was amazing, because after Nirvana broke, you will see that Mariah Carey was wearing flannel in her next video, which blew me away. I thought this was so amazing. This little band from Seattle has changed the way Mariah Carey is dressing in her videos.
I didn't know Kurt personally, and I just know that a lot of people felt that through his vision and his music, he stood for something. He paved a way that now we're starving for. When he died, you had a really great visionary die. Smells Like Teen Spirit was really like an injection. It propelled people to choose what they wanted to do with themselves and their questioning. And it gave a generation some juice.
If you are doing a movie 50 years from now and you want to capture the fall of '91, it'll be Smells Like Teen Spirit you'll have on the radio in the background.
Nirvana may actually be the last great rock band of their time to emerge. The last one that could have that kind of power to change a culture, to change rock history, or to have a huge impact on rock history. I hope we see more bands like that. I don't know that we're going to right now or for the foreseeable future.